Señores, you don't seem to understand. I am a farmer. You don't seem to understand that we don't want your welfare handouts. Your political positions are meaningless to us, and your factory jobs are what we oppose. We want our sons and daughters, their sons and daughters, to continue to be farmers on our own lands, with our own languages and our own cultures and our own traditions. This is what we are fighting for. This is what we are willing to die for. That statement was by a Zapatista farmer, an indigenous farmer in southern Mexico. And sustainability is a matter of life and death. It is for a lot of people. And I guess that's one of the reasons why sometimes I cannot stand the word sustainability. Because it honestly makes me think of those huge corporations like Dow Chemical or Chase Bank or Exxon that says they're putting together these sustainable initiatives. And really, all that means is they're recycling their office paper while polluting another ocean. And I guess that sometimes I also don't like the word because it'll make me think of like a straw bale house, which I would love to have, most people would, or an organic garden, which I do have, or other, amazing, wonderful alternatives, but that in and of themselves do not address unsustainability, and that in and of themselves are not viable if we don't address the root causes of unsustainability. We have machines that can convert salt water to drinking water. We have cars that can run on salt water. We know that an entire country can be fed on sustainable, organic food. We could run the whole world's electricity off solar power and wind power if we conserved. And we can build anything out of any recycled materials. We can even build houses out of tires. Tomorrow we could run the entire world sustainably, or at least begin the process to implement sustainable solutions. So we have to ask ourselves, why aren't these sustainable alternatives being implemented? Sustainable alternatives cannot be implemented and be viable for everyone, everywhere, without a foundation of political and economic justice. Otherwise, it's impossible. The problem is that political and economic justice doesn't exist everywhere. That's why we have to do something about that. So this is a farmer in Haiti. I decided a few years ago to make a documentary film about food justice. And I went to 7 different countries. In Haiti, I interviewed farmers who are having a really difficult time, the few farmers that are left, having a very difficult time competing against the subsidized grain that is being dumped on the island of Haiti and basically getting rid of all the small farmers who can't compete. And a lot of those small farmers you will find in the slums with other people who cannot afford to farm or buy food and have begun eating mud. This is a woman in Serre Soleil who, which is like the biggest slum in Port-au-Prince, who's making the mud for the mud cakes. But I also went to, I love Haiti, but I'm moving on now to Cuba, which is a slightly happier story, even though it's very, very close in proximity. In Cuba, I interviewed a bunch of farmers who, thanks to land reform and during the Cuban Revolution, but were able to prove to the entire world that a whole country can be farmed and fed sustainably and organically. It's an amazing story. Next, I went to India, and there I interviewed the families of farmers who have committed suicide. And this is a father of one of the young farmers who committed suicide. And they have begun killing themselves. The numbers are up to about 300,000 right now because they get into huge debt over very expensive seeds and chemicals that they are told will give them a huge yield. And when they don't get a huge yield, they have so much shame that they kill themselves. And this is mostly uneducated, illiterate farmers who are being targeted by representatives of the big seed corporations like Monsanto. I also went to Kenya, and in Kenya I interviewed a bunch of tea farmers who were organizing against the Kenya Tea Development Agency, and they had actually been beaten and jailed multiple times for protesting to receive fair food prices. This is another woman farmer in Zambia. I interviewed a whole bunch of farmers in Zambia who are adamantly dedicated to organic farming, and they meet regularly and have little trainings and meetings with each other so they can share ideas and bounce ideas off each other, like how to raise chickens and what kind of vegetables and milks help treat HIV the best. And they are also adamantly opposed to the big US seed corporations like Monsanto and Syngenta and Dow Chemical, and they all know them by name and are very against them. In the United States, I interviewed farmers in Iowa and the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and members of the Pine Ridge and White Earth Reservation to kind of look at what political and economic policies, along with American history, have created the food system that we have today. I also went to Mexico. And in Mexico, I went to Chiapas, a southern state, and the Zapatistas are indigenous farming families. That's who I focused on, who are in resistance to the Mexican government. The Zapatistas in Mexico, when you do see pictures of them, they are often wearing masks and bandanas, and that's pretty much for the purpose of conveying a message of anonymity and solidarity, that they're all equal. That's them. So in looking at food, what is one of the most important things that you need to look at? Land, right? Well, in Mexico, in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement went through between the governments of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And what NAFTA did was it actually canceled an agreement in the Mexican Constitution that guaranteed farmers the right to farm on communal land. And this was a land right actually won during the Mexican Revolution. And this is a picture of Chiapas, and it's a land very, very rich in oil. And when NAFTA went through, it opened up this land to oil exploration and drilling to any foreign government or corporation. We can go to the next one. But the Zapatistas, when they found out what NAFTA was going to do, they decided to pretty much start a revolution. And they told the Mexican government to leave them and their land alone. And there was a lot of violence, and there still is. When you're down there, there's constantly tanks going by, and it's really difficult to go into the communities because they're under such a threat of violence. But they have taken over land and said, these are autonomous communities. They formed multiple autonomous communities all over southern Mexico and part of Guatemala. And these autonomous communities are completely under their control and jurisdiction. And they did a wonderful job, which wasn't possible during the Mexican Revolution. They did a wonderful job of reaching out internationally a lot over the internet and really building a lot of solidarity with other people that were concerned and supported. And so it's actually would be a huge disaster if the Mexican government went right now and try to destroy the Zapatistas, which is something they have on their side, is that international support. They have amazing different types of institutions. All their houses, all the buildings are murals. It's beautiful. We can go, whoops. They have, like I said, occupied a lot of land, and they are very dedicated to the use of their own traditional seeds and are extremely against GMO seeds, and even to the point where they sell their corn seeds online and their organic coffee, and their coffee is delicious. And the seeds, I think we overwatered the garden personally, is what I think happened, because they didn't work too well last year, but we're going to try them again sometime. But that's a really good way to support them. This is the rotating government, and it's slightly intimidating to sit in front of them, but they're just wearing those bandanas for the purposes I explained. And these governments rotate with different types of just regular civilians through. That's how they're making decisions. They have free schools, which are taught in their own indigenous languages, about their own history. And we can do another one. They have organizations for women, herbal clinics and offices and doctors, and a million types of different co-ops, and lots of free markets that where food can be traded fairly and locally. So by no means is the Zapatista movement a perfect movement. There's a lot of poverty down there still, much because of the government and the terrorism from the Mexican government. But it is a model that is very inspiring as far as such a small group of indigenous farmers with absolutely no power that stood up to huge, enormous power. And that leads me to my idea that I think is worth spreading, that the more we create and support and engage in movements for political and economic justice, the more likely it is that all of our sustainable alternatives will be sustainable. Thank you.